Yeah, hi folks. Yes, the news seems to get worse every day, and the latest is this. Communist China is moving in. They're in the process of making a security agreement with the Solomon Islands, which will enable them to have Navy ships and armed forces in our backyard. It is time for everyone to wake up. This is happening. They're on the move. But anyway, today I want to cover our dear leader's latest COVID announcement and some damning Pfizer information. But first, some good news.
He succeeded on the euthanasia referendum. Now David Seymour wants the question of co-governance put to the ballot too.
Yeah, now I'm really pleased that someone who is already in Parliament is taking up this issue. And if it takes a referendum to get all this separatist BS sorted, so be it.
Co-governance is actually exclusive. I think it creates resentment.
And it's not part of the treaty.
We need to have an open debate about it. That is healthier for our society.
Co-governance is usually part of treaty settlements, giving Māori a seat at the table. Examples include Te Urewera National Park, the Waikato and Whanganui Rivers, 14 tupuna maunga across Auckland, and Māori seats on councils and other organisations.
And none of this should be happening.
Are also on the rise.
Co-governance has been around and with us and utilised in New Zealand for a number of years.
And now we're paying the price because of corrupt politicians like you.
And by and large has worked very successfully for us.
Isn't the Treaty of Waitangi a partnership and therefore co-governance is simply a flow on from that?
We reject that. My reading of the treaty is it says all people have the same rights and duties.
But the Māori Party says ACT's policy is dangerous.
The main reason that non-Māori or any of us should be concerned with this type of politics is because it emboldens racism. It emboldens white supremacy.
Wow, that's rich coming from the biggest racist, brown supremacist there is.
At the moment, Pākehā dominate when it comes to holding power in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Part of this is a frustration that they've been asked to change the systems of power that have privileged and entitled them.
When it comes to nationwide democratic institutions having some seats reserved at the table, I just don't think that's compatible with one person, one vote democracy.
Exactly.
David Seymour says it will be a bottom line when forming a government with National.
Yeah, and if he does that, he gets my vote, even though I don't really trust the guy.
He also adds it'll require a new law defining the treaty principles with a referendum held at the following election. Christopher Luxon making no promises today, but shares concern.
Even what we mean by the words co-governance, it's not clear. And so, my desire is if you want to lead for constitutional change, you make your case, you make the argument.
We are more than just Māori and Pākehā. We need to embrace all.
Of course we're a mix of multicultures, but there is only one tangata whenua, and our rights and interests will be respected.
And so will everybody else's. Now, I watched this announcement the other day to find out when the mandates would be dropped, and this is how Ardern started.
Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm here today to set out the next set of changes to our COVID-19 settings in New Zealand. After 2 long years of living through a pandemic, it's easy to lose sight of how far New Zealand has come. This exact day 2 years ago, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield announced from over at the Ministry of Health that we had 36 new cases of COVID-19.
Now, who gives a damn about 2 years ago? People are only interested in the mandates. And it took her 16 minutes to tell us about the mandates. The rest of the time was all political and how she was saving New Zealand. The woman is truly vulgar.
Prime Minister, in terms of the timing, why now? Why open up now? Because is the political pressure just too great to open up and relax the rules?
Oh, firstly, I was going to let the graph speak for itself. You can see that our timing is very much based on the evidence in front of us over when it's safe to do so.
Yeah, it's not about politics. It's all about the evidence on the graph, she says.
It's been a turbulent few weeks since our last poll at the end of January, and we're seeing some big shifts in the numbers. Let's take a look. National is now the highest ranking party, sitting on 39, a jump of 7. Labour is just behind on 37, a drop of 3.
But no, it's not about politics. It's all about the evidence on the graph.
The removal of the mandates and the vaccine passes will embolden the likes of the people who came to Parliament to protest?
No. Well, it certainly shouldn't, because that's not the basis of the decisions we've made today. And I made it clear right here in this theaterette that when we came to the point where we would remove passes and make changes to mandates, it would be because it's safe to do so.
But hey, it's all about the evidence on the graph and when it's safe to do so. And Jacinda is still vaccinating children 5 to 11, knowing this.
First at 6 o'clock, a new study says the Pfizer vaccine is less effective in preventing COVID-19 infections in younger kids. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Lori Fulbright.
And I'm Craig Day. News on 6's Jonathan Cooper is live with details on the study and reaction from health leaders here in our area. Jonathan?
Craig and Lori, this study looked at more than 1 million children in New York State during the Omicron surge, and the findings are raising some new questions. As more children across the country get a COVID-19 vaccine for the first time, a new study is looking at its effectiveness. This week, the New York State Department of Health released findings from a study in December and January that looked at newly vaccinated kids between the ages of 5 and 17. Just 1 month after getting the Pfizer shot, the study showed that effectiveness against any COVID-19 infection dropped from 68% to just 12% in kids 5 to 11.
Yeah, just 12% effective from catching it. And she's still encouraging people to get vaccinated, knowing this. And hat tip to Shadowband for nudging me to look into this story a bit more.
Now, to give you a bit of background, you might remember how late last year, a group called the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency, they filed a lawsuit against the FDA in order to force them to release all of the documents that are in their possession that pertain to the Pfizer vaccine's approval. Specifically, they were looking to get access to the 33,000 pages of data which Pfizer submitted to the FDA in order to get emergency use authorization and then later full approval of their COVID vaccine. Now, of course, the FDA tried to slow walk the process. They said that they needed to take 55 full years to release all the documents. But as we have reported earlier, the judge in the case, he disagreed, and he forced the FDA to release all of their documents at an accelerated pace so that the public can have access to them all by the end of this year. And for your reference, here is the schedule of release that they now have to follow. On March the 1st, the FDA released 10,000 pages of documents, which are now publicly available. Then on April 1st, they'll have to release another 10,000 pages. Then on May 1st, June 1st, and July 1st, they'll have to release 80,000 pages on each of those dates. Then on August 1st, they'll have to release 70,000 pages. And then subsequently, following August, they will have to release 55,000 pages on the first business day of each month until all of the documents are released. Now, one very important thing to mention here is that the court order, which forced the FDA to release these documents at an accelerated pace, it did not mention the order in which the documents have to be released. And so perhaps if they exist, the most damning documents might be pushed back later into the schedule. We'll just have to wait and see. Regardless, though, what this schedule actually means in practice is that as of this moment, me and you, meaning the public, we now have access to the first 10,000 pages of Pfizer documents. And if you're interested in checking them out for yourself, you can find them over on the official website for the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency group. All you have to do is scroll down a little bit and then click on the button that says Pfizer's documents, and then you can go through them one by one, download them onto your computer, and
yeah, now I've posted a link to these downloads and to this video in the description below.
Scan through them for yourself. Now, in terms of what these newly released documents actually show, well, there's one batch that has the collected adverse reactions that people experienced during the first 3-month period shortly after the Pfizer vaccine began to be marketed.
First 3-month period.
Marketed to the public, specifically during the 3-month period between December 1st of 2020 and February 28th of 2021. This was the period when the vaccine was available under emergency use authorization, and it was the first time that people at large had access to it. And according to these documents, during that time period, meaning during that 3-month time period, here's what the data showed. To start with, there were 1,223 fatalities that were associated with the vaccine. Although, just to pause here for a quick moment, it's worth mentioning that none of these 1,223 fatalities have been verified to be directly related to the vaccine. But whoever reported it to the system likely believed that it was, and that's why it's mentioned in this report. So take that for what you will. Then moving on, there were 42,086 case reports, which contained within them a total of 158,893 adverse events, which were associated with the vaccine, meaning that the average person who was listed in that case report experienced something like 3 or 4 different adverse reactions. That's why those numbers are like that. And then furthermore, it's worth noting that this data was accumulated from the U.S. government's VAERS system, from reports that were submitted directly to Pfizer, as well as from reports that were submitted to the equivalent systems in other countries. However, and this is something that the documents themselves mention, because these adverse reaction reports are submitted voluntarily, it's not exactly clear what percentage of adverse reactions are underreported, meaning that the real number could be anywhere from 5% to even 500% higher, which is have no idea. Regardless, though, let's continue digging in through the data together. Most of these adverse reactions were reported in the United States, standing at about 13,739. Then in terms of other countries, you had the United Kingdom with 13,404 adverse cases, Italy with 2,578, Germany with 1,913, France with 1,506, Portugal with 866, Spain with 756, and then the remaining 7,324 adverse case reports, they were distributed among 56 other countries. And then in terms of what these adverse reactions actually look like, meaning what symptoms the people actually experienced, well, these documents present a bit of a breakdown. And so in terms of the more common reactions, here's what the documents show. General disorders and administrative site conditions accounted for 51,335 adverse events. Nervous system disorders accounted for 25,957. Musculoskeletal and connective tissue disorders accounted for 17,283 adverse events. Gastrointestinal disorders accounted for about 14,096 adverse events. Skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders accounted for 8,760 adverse events. Respiratory, thoracic, and mediastinal disorders accounted for 8,848 adverse events. Infection and infestations accounted for 4,610 adverse events. Injuries, poisoning, and procedural complications accounted for 5,590 adverse events. And then when you go a bit further down into the documents, they list something that they call cardiovascular adverse events of special interest. And of these, the documents show that in the first 3 months of the injections, there were 1,403, 241 of which were medically confirmed, and 1,162 which were not medically confirmed. And by the way, if you'd like to dig deeper into what any of those specific conditions were, you can look at the tables in the documents, which have a actually pretty great breakdown of the different symptoms and what percentage each of those symptoms represent. Also, there is something else that's worth noting, which is that if you continue to go down in these documents, they have another section which doesn't have percentages, but all it does is that it has page after page of an appendix which includes the adverse events of special interest. And in that list, there are many, many different conditions, including hemorrhages, even things like herpes, and different syndromes, which are associated with a period of time shortly after people were administered the vaccine. Now, again, just because something is present on that long list does not mean necessarily that it is an adverse reaction that came from the vaccines. It's very likely just something that the researchers noted to look out for, maybe because they saw 1 or 2 cases pop up. Regardless, though, the next logical question to ask is what percentage of the vaccines that were distributed do these numbers represent? What is the percentage? What is the denominator to look out for here? And this is where things get a little weird, because if you look at the document, specifically at section 3.1.1, which is called General Overview, it says, quote, "It is estimated that approximately blank doses of Pfizer vaccine were shipped worldwide during this 3-month period." And notice there that the actual number of vaccines that were shipped out during this 3-month period is redacted. For some reason, either Pfizer or the people over at the FDA, they decided to redact this information, making it difficult to figure out what the percentages are for both the associated deaths as well as for the associated adverse events.
And she's still encouraging people to get vaccinated, knowing this. And hat tip to Peter Rhodes for this one.
Have you had your 4th booster yet? You know what they say, sure, you'll still get the COVID, but don't worry, it'll be much milder. You won't be going into the ICU. There doesn't seem to be a lot of science behind that assertion, and there's mounting evidence to the contrary. A Polish study has found that mRNA vaccines may be damaging brain cells and immune systems. I talked a couple of weeks ago that they're causing an uptick in chilblains. Chilblains you can probably handle. The death of your brain cells and the collapse of your immune system is slightly worse news than chilblains. Meanwhile, a German study of all-cause mortality has found that since the vaccinations got going, young and middle-aged persons are dying in larger numbers. Dr. Guy Hatchard has been writing about this at the Conservative Woman website for some time, and he joins us now from New Zealand. Guy, the big takeaway from this, which I think is quite extraordinary, is that in 2020, when the COVID started raging, it didn't actually cause excess mortality that year because most of the people who died were over the average life expectancy in countries like the UK. So, for example, the average age of COVID death was 82.5 years or whatever it was. Then they start vaccinating everybody, and suddenly we have a huge uptick in deaths of the middle-aged and the young, and we're getting used to like celebrity. There's a spate of celebrity 52-year-olds, I notice, having fatal heart attacks. Something odd is going on, is it not?
Absolutely, it is. The paper yesterday here, New Zealand Herald, greetings from the Hobbit Kingdom, Mark. Had a headline, most COVID patients in the Omicron outbreak are vaccinated, but that is no reason to doubt vaccine benefits. And they also ran an article saying that the huge uptick in cardiac events, they dubbed it the Warn effect. They said middle-aged men are getting anxiety because they think they may be similar to Shane Warne, and that they're having heart attacks because of anxiety. That's what happens when the government...
Is that actually true? Are people seriously arguing that Shane Warne died of anxiety, who was a brilliant cricketer, and I regret that I'll never actually see him do some of those incredible things he did in the 90s. But people are actually arguing now that this is some sort of anxiety, general anxiety that he died of.
People are doing anything but admit that something has gone terribly wrong. If our government here, for example, was to admit that there had been a wrong turn, we've had 2 years of saturation advertising. You can't turn on the television or go to social media without being told that mRNA vaccines are completely safe and effective. And people have become brainwashed, and the government has curated this. They paid for it. They paid the media. And now they're faced with the fact that it actually doesn't work. Now we actually have COVID. We've had COVID free in New Zealand for 2 years. Now we have COVID. The vaccinated and the unvaccinated are getting it about equally as far as the relative population numbers are concerned. So it would be political suicide for Ardern to admit for 2 years that they had been pulling the wool over our eyes. And there's no doubt that that happened absolutely deliberately. The government swept the side effects under the carpet. We had 2,000 excess deaths in our very small country during the time that the vaccine was rolled out.
Yeah, now I'll stop it there, and you can watch the rest of it in the link below.